This is Canada Reads American Style, featuring two friends who love Canada Reads and Canadian literature. Welcome our host Rebecca from Michigan and Tara from Ontario.
Hello and welcome to Canada Reads American Style. This is Tara, and this evening I have with me Barbara Black, the author. Welcome, Barbara.
Hello, nice to be here.
We're so excited to have you. So I'm just going to give a little background. So Barbara was born in North Vancouver, BC, and currently resides in Victoria. On her website, she refers to herself as a serial artist, which I love that description, by the way. And I can see why. I almost think you're like a Renaissance woman. So I'm going to go through it right now for our listeners. So as a writer and editor, Barbara has worked in journalism, public relations, government policy, education, and the arts. As a creative writer, she has explored the genres of poetry, fiction, flash fiction, nonfiction, and libretto. For the listeners like myself who did not know, I'm just going to define libretto as the text of an opera or other long vocal work.
That's
Cool.
Correct. Yes, it's a
Very
comic chamber opera that I collaborated on.
Which I know nothing about. So, and then as a classically trained vocalist, she has performed in both the classical and jazz world in both vocal ensembles and as a soloist with orchestra. She is also a composer and most recently collaborated as a lyricist and librettist, which is, I'm like, this is a lot, Barbara. You have a lot going on.
Maybe too much sometimes.
Barbara's short story collection, Music from a Strange Planet, debuted in 2021 to critical acclaim. Rebecca and I actually spoke to Barbara at that time. So that episode aired in February 12th, 2022, if you want to go back and hear us discuss her first book. Her most recent book, Little Fortified Stories, was released on May 17th. So again, welcome, Barbara. And let's start our discussion with you telling us about Little Fortified Stories and its origins.
In 2014, I believe it was, I attended the Disquiet International Literary Program in Lisbon, and I was signed up to the short fiction workshop. And at that point, I'd never heard of microfiction or flash fiction, but I knew I wanted to explore it. So on my day off from the workshop, I decided that I wanted to go to the Port Center in Lisbon. And that's, what you do. You're in Portugal, you should try some port. And so I went in this beautiful historic building and ordered 3 samples. And I took the first sip from that port, and I immediately had this distinct voice from that drink, this very distinct statement. And I immediately wanted to write it down, but I only had this little tiny notebook they'd given us as a gift. And I went, well, that's what I have. So I wrote the story down, and of course it kind of came out tiny because it was in a tiny book. But I noticed that somehow the character of that port and the flavor and the mood and everything was in the story. And I thought, oh, that is so cool. And so I came back to the Port Center and did a few others. And that is the origin of Little Fortified Stories, because of course, port is a fortified wine. So I ended up calling them Little Fortified Stories. And when I got back home in Canada, I just continued with other spirits, other like alcoholic spirits. And I was only doing little sips just to, tell you I wasn't drinking the whole thing. I was really small sips and then waiting. And it was like a liquid prompt. So I added gin and I added tequila and I did rum and whiskey and used those as prompts for a story. And that's very common for flash fiction and microfiction, is to use prompts. And that is how Little Fortified Stories came to be.
That's fascinating. And thank you for explaining the title then, because I did wonder about the title and I didn't put it together with the spirits in the collection. So very cool. So, and also that book was a long time in the works then if you started in 2014.
Yes, it was. I started it and then sort of didn't know how to continue after the spirits, and I kind of hit a point where I'm like, okay, I got enough of these spirits, and now what else am I going to do? So there was a gap, and then I started working on short stories and learning how to. I love teaching myself things, so learning how to write short stories by reading them, analyzing them, and then I kind of got to the end of that, and I went, oh, I have a whole bunch of stories. It could be a book. And
Yeah.
so that intervened with the finishing of the little Fortified Stories.
Interesting, because my next question was going to be, as I mentioned earlier, your debut, Music from a Strange Planet, is a short story collection, but Little Fortified Stories is a flash fiction collection. And that's why I was wondering why you did the transition from short story to flash fiction, but it's almost like a more of a wave motion, like going from one to the other and then back again.
Yeah, and kind of getting smaller and smaller too.
Yeah.
My short stories were already short for short stories, and then I moved to Flash, and then Micro's even smaller. But how this came about that I finished the Flash fiction one was after Music from a Strange Planet had, kind of circulated for a few years. My publisher at Caitlin Press she asked me, do you have another manuscript? And I said, well, I don't know. I have this one with really short, flashy type kind of stories, but it's not finished. It's only about maybe 2/3 or so finished or less than that. And I said, well, do you want to see it? And she said, nope, I know you're writing. I'll take it. I'll draw up a contract. I had no intention to create a book before that, but I had an opportunity. And so I said yes. And then I just started going deeper and deeper into flash and microfiction and
Yeah.
other hybrids, not just those two. And I did workshops, flash and micro. I did prompts I found on literary journals. I did workshops with the Ekphrastic Review, which is a Canadian journal that does accept flash, and they have challenges where they'll put up an image and you can write to it. And I did several workshops with an American woman. She's a Flash writer and a teacher and a real champion of Flash, Meg Pokras. And she has the most fun workshops with lovely people in them who are all talented. And I just began to love the intensity of the short fiction
Yeah.
and how you can kind of stretch it more, maybe more than a short story. You can go a bit beyond the normal or a bit beyond the real. And so I just continued writing. I entered contests, and then voila, there was the book came to be. Oh, but that's not really true. I left out a bit, and that is that I had almost a year's worth of writer's block in there.
Wow. After you signed the contract?
Yes.
Oh,
It was like it was like, oh my God, now I have to write. And I guess it was quite soon after having a book out, which is other writers told me people take a longer break. But I did get through it. And there is a story in the collection about my not having words. But I got through it and worked hard and finished it.
wow. It's funny that you described it as flash fiction being able to go beyond the real,
Hmm.
because when I was reading this collection, it had a very surrealistic feel to me. Like sometimes I felt like I wasn't getting so much a narrative as that I was looking in on a scene and getting all the little details. Like it was very cool. Wanting to know more, but yet I was also satisfied with what I was getting.
That's good. That's
Yeah.
good. Because I did allow myself to not always have to have a story arc. There are people who have made up rules, and some of them are very good about flash and micro. But really, it started as a really experimental kind of genre, and so I've got dialogues in mine and some monologues. I have a list story here and there. So there are sometimes, or even sort of a scene that has some kind of closure, but it may not be like a full blown story.
Now, the book is divided into 6 parts. I thought it would be fun to look at. So, you mentioned the spirits. So, that's the first part, which
Hmm.
is distillations, in which each piece is paired with a specific spirit.
Hmm.
And then another one that I wanted to look at section was the visual provocations, in which each piece was paired with a work of art. I really like the two senses kind of blending there, kind of thing.
Hmm.
So let's look at distillations. You mentioned like taking sips. Did you find that each spirit had a vibe as you were taking a sip?
Yes, I totally did. I find that there's a character to it, and I can talk about that using a couple of stories from the port. Yeah, that they have like a certain taste, they have a certain smell or color or a mood or a weight, and those things kind of leaked into, or I intentionally put some of those qualities into the narrative so that it echoes the quality of that libation.
Mm. You're making me want to do like a little flight myself now and just not in order to write, but just to see if I get different vibes. Interesting. So now for visual provocations in which each piece was paired with a work of art. How did
Mhm.
you choose the works of art?
Well, I love art. I'm always looking at art, either on my phone or on the computer. And I was introduced to what's called ekphrastic writing, which is writing from a visual prompt by the Ekphrastic Review, and it's a great way of inspiring a narrative. And so I generally, well, I use both. I am given sometimes these images, and a lot of times I've chosen them myself. A lot of the ones in that section, the ekphrastic section, the visual provocations are ones that I came across. And what I'm looking for is just an instant attachment to that image. And I know that something's going to come from it. I know a story can come from it. So that's kind of how I find them. And usually they're odd in some way.
Yeah.
Often they are. Yeah.
So they weren't like favorite pieces of art that you knew you wanted to write something. It was just a piece that you happened to see and something clicked.
Yes. Yes. And a couple of them, maybe two or three of them, actually were from the Ekphrastic Review, one of their challenges. And those were everybody's writing to the same visual. And it's interesting to see when they post them how different people have made a completely different story out of that particular image.
Yeah. So the start of your book, at the beginning of your book, I should say,
Mhm.
there is a quote. There's quotes throughout, but this one at the beginning really hit me. And it is "The unnatural and the strange have a perfume of their own" by Fernando Pessoa. Why did you choose this quote for the beginning?
Well, I chose it because I thought it was a good fit for what I was doing in the collection, which was going outside the norm. I'm not sure about unnatural, but in a way it could be that, and stretching reality, as we were talking about. And I do that, but I'm still offering this kind of emotional undertow in the stories. And I know there are strange stories in there, and but they're not so strange that you don't still have like a human element to
Mhm.
it. And when I look at the end of that line, the a perfume of their own, they have a perfume of their own. I feel like that sort of refers to the stories, that the stories have their own integrity. They have a perfume of their own. And then the perfume is like the lingering emotional resonance, like when someone who's wearing perfume walks by and there's this lingering fragrance, except that for the story, it's not necessarily a fragrance, it's a feeling.
That's beautiful, Barbara. That's beautiful. So I went through in your introduction, writer, singer, composer. You are also a collage artist, and your pieces of your collage are in the book. Would you like to tell us about your collage?
I started with collage when I was joining Instagram, like way at the beginning of my writing career. I didn't know what to post on Instagram because at that point, I wasn't that keen on sharing all my personal stuff. Of course, I've gotten over that sort of now. But so I decided I always like collages, so that I decided I would collage my own works, so my own poetry. And at that time, it would have been things from the short story collection. And then it became collages about my flash fiction or my little fortified stories. And well, this is kind of how I operate. My specialty is that I learned to do something by doing. And so
Hmm.
I started out, I don't know how to do this, but I just kept being calm. I loved it right away because it's not about words. And when you write, you get to a point where you're just like, I can't do words right now. And so I would take a break with the collage, and it's so visual and intuitive for me, the process. And I rarely plan the process of my collages, but I usually do have an idea for like a crucial scene that I want to capture in that collage from the story text. And I just don't know how I'm going to do it, but I know usually I want to do a crucial scene. So I go into my kind of messy music collage room, and I open all the files and drawers. I have old magazines and paper fragments, and all sometimes even like pressed flowers, whatever. Have old watch parts from my dad. He was a horologist, from his junk drawer, and I look for a piece that's just gonna kickstart the process. And that can take a while, but when I see it, I know it, and that's it. That's when I start assembling the collage.
What I really liked about the collage, because you do mix it with like your poetry or part or
Mhm,
something from the story, so there are words included on your collages.
mhm, that's right.
That when I first look at it, it's like an image. I'm just kind of looking at it, and then as I read the words and then dive a little deeper into the collage, I can see the story
Mhm,
in that the word. So it really would link up for me in a
mhm.
really like subtle way that I loved.
Oh, good.
Okay, let's circle back to your writing block, if you don't mind.
Okay.
Talking about writer's block. Before I ask you my next question, because I want to ask if you're currently working on something, but then you mentioned the writer's block after your last book in
Mhm.
between. So how did you get past your writing block?
Well, it was tricky because I didn't know whether to push or to let go, and so I started with push. And I tried and I tried and I tried, and I either just couldn't even write, or I would write and get stuck, or would write and it just wasn't the kind of material that I wanted. And it took me a while. Like I do like to kind of push myself and say, come on, just, push past. And
Mm-hmm.
I'd done that a lot with my first book. And this was the time where it was not to do push past and try to do it. So finally realized that, and I stopped and I read. And for, I don't know, maybe that was for 4 or 5 months or something. And I just left it. I didn't make no demands on myself at all to write. And I did still keep reading flash fictions, and keep feeding it into my brain, but I kind of just let myself go, and it came back.
I
I've been a writer in sort of my job my entire life, and I'd never ever experienced that before. Of course,
Yeah,
that's different than creative writing too. Creative writing, you're pulling a lot out of yourself. So it's not the same as, writing a government document or something. But yeah,
yeah,
it was a interesting experience.
yeah. It doesn't sound pleasant, but you got through it. That's what counts.
That's right.
So, any current projects? Are you taking a little bit of a break or what's planned?
I really don't know totally what's coming up next. I would like a break from writing, I think, after I've done all the promo promotional stuff. But I have in the last year been thinking I would love to write a children's book. I have a lot of them on my shelves, and I love children's books. I have like a whole bunch of Pinocchio collections in Italian and in English with beautiful illustrations. I have a collection of Pippi Longstocking and picture books. So I love those books, and I think I could have a crack at it and have some fun and not be as demanding for the amount of text that you have to generate. So that is one that I think I could try.
Yeah.
I have another thing sort of that I won't say it's cooking, it's kind of simmering right now, and that is a novella in Flash. I did a workshop and I started generating an idea for a novella in Flash, which is the chapters are like one Flash story, but they are joined and there's a thread through the whole collection. So this one was based on where I grew up in North Vancouver, and it has some characters in it who are quite out of the ordinary, really eccentric, but they are the actual people. You would think that I had made them up, but these people were very eccentric. And other characters in the story are would come in as well. And it has a beautiful setting, the forest and the mountains, and it's set in the 60s and 70s. So this workshop helped us generate characters and generate, for example, things, music from that era, what food was being eaten, and what was in the news. And I generated stuff, and then I just didn't know what to do with it.
Mhm.
It's still sitting there, and I think I might pick it up. But there are two stories in the little Fortified Stories that are from that generated work. One is Fire Dancing in the Dark, about the classical ballet teacher. Of course, I have fictionalized beyond her interesting character. And there's another one called John Albright Dreams He's a Snowshoe Hare. That one's actually about women's lib, and it's kind of a surreal, comical story. So at least two of the stories got into little Fortified Stories. We'll see if I generate a bigger work from it or not.
That's exciting. Well, if you do, sign me up because I'm going to read that. Sounds
Okay.
fantastic. Yep. Okay, I always love to end with a little bit of book talk
Mhm.
outside of your book. So I'd like to know, what have you read recently? What are you currently reading? Favorite books? Anything. This can go any way you want.
I am really glad you asked that
Perfect.
because I am reading a book that is huge and heavy and about 400 pages long. It's by Adam Moss and it's called The Work of Art, meaning it's about works of art and it's about how we work to create our art. And it's exploring the creative process, basically. And if this fellow Adam Moss, he interviews musicians and writers and visual artists, cartoonists, script writers, some of whom you may know their names. And it's very engaging. It's a very casual interview where you feel like you're in the room with him and his subject. And people are talking about how they go from like a vague idea to cycling through all the kind of manifestations of the idea and getting to the final product, which sometimes it never bears any resemblance to the original. But the book has lots of visuals, and it's full of images of charts and maps and scribbles and drawings and just all sorts of ways that people try to keep generating something from their kernel of that idea. And there's two stories I just read recently. I only just started the book a month ago, but if I can just briefly kind of describe them, you'll get an
Yeah.
idea. The choreographer Twyla Tharp, who choreographs modern dance, he goes to her, I think it's New York, penthouse, where at the top level is all the dance studio. And she is showing him a new dance that she's choreographing, and how she does that. She has a gigantic scroll that's 14 feet long that has all these the dance moves around these codes, her own personal codes and diagrams, and this is how she figures out how she's going to choreograph to a certain piece of music. And she wants Adam Moss to do it with her and dance, and he is completely baffled because he doesn't understand any of her, this coded language she has. So that was very, very fun, that interview. And then the second one was about the writer Max Porter. I don't know if you know him. I really like his writing. And before he writes his story, he says that he draws the characters. He has a drawing talent, and he has art talent in his family. So he starts with drawing his characters and maybe his setting and maybe writing just randomly around the paper, but it's the visual. And he even thinks about how he's going to stage the story. And so he starts with a visual component as a writer, and then he goes to the writing. So what this book, kind of reminds me of is, your way is the right way. And basically, there's nothing too weird as long as it works.
That book sounds fascinating. I'm going to add it to my TBR.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for joining us tonight. Thank you for your lovely collection. I really enjoyed reading it. What I like about flash fiction is that it's so easy to do a reread, to go back, and it's something you can really dive into. So thank you. It's a lovely collection, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. That was very enjoyable.
Thank you for joining us on our bookish journey. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing, rating, and reviewing Canada Reads American Style wherever you listen. You can connect with the podcast and Rebecca on Instagram at Canada Reads American Style, and with Tara at On a Branch Reads. Until next time, keep reading.